Good evening and welcome to tonight's work session ahead of the regular scheduled city council meeting for Monday, March 16th. I'm going to first thank you all for being here, some familiar faces. Looking forward to this conversation. Long time coming, and I'm going to pass it over to the city manager since we're running a little late to get started right away.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to those who brought this conversation forward. And special thanks to Sarah Reitzman, who is our local expert, guru on all things housing. So when she offered to make herself available, we jumped at the chance. So Sarah, I will get your presentation started. And you can just jump in.
Do you want me to move up here? I have a click.
Wherever.
She clicks it.
I'll click.
Forward it for you.
I can stay here then. All right. Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
I'm happy to be here. So we're talking about RSA 79E today. For those of you who haven't already seen it, you have this really beautiful guide. It's a municipal guide to RSA 79E that we created at New Hampshire Housing in partnership with Judy Barrett at Barrett Planning Group out of Massachusetts. This is a couple years old now, so there are a handful of things that have changed in the legislature over the past 2 years that are not in here or need to be updated in here, but I took this beautiful 70-something page document and tried to turn it into something shorter, a brief overview into this PowerPoint. So you're probably all familiar with 79E to some extent. It is a program that was originally used for historic preservation. It's been around for about 20 years. It offers temporary tax relief for the rehab of existing buildings. That was the traditional use. Next slide, Karen. One more. Perfect. It is enabling legislation, which means municipalities opt to adopt it. Traditionally, 79E could be applied to downtowns and village centers only. Again, temporary tax relief to property owners who are willing to reinvest in older properties to return them to productive use. It's supposed to be ultimately a win to the community to get these properties back into productive use and more beautiful. So traditional 79E has created some really exceptional projects. We'll talk about a couple of them later. What it basically does is just freezes the assessed value. So next slide. It's tax relief for up to 15 years. You get tax relief in certain increments for certain things. So for example, if you add new affordable housing units, that's plus 4 years. That's how you get up to that 15 years. And there's a covenant attached to it to ensure public benefits to the community. So that can be like having new housing units, economic vitality, cultural, historical significance. The building is on the National or State Register of Historic Places. So keeping these buildings preserved. So again, historic preservation, housing, affordable housing, significant rehabilitation. Next slide. And next slide again. So I specifically want to talk, that was really traditional 79E, and when we talk about the examples that we have in New Hampshire, it's the original program. There are some newer programs. Unfortunately, they haven't been used, I don't want to say at all, but not much yet, to the point where we can really talk about how they work and talk about what other communities have done. So residential property revitalization zones, these are homeowners who want to improve the quality or the condition or the use of an existing dwelling. Single family homes or structures that have up to 4 units that are older than 40 years old qualify. So unlike traditional 79E, these residential property revitalization zones can be outside of the downtown. That's the big benefit of them. You can make any residential property revitalization zone that you want that works best for your community. Tax relief period is the same as with traditional 79E. No property can be granted tax relief more than once in a 20-year period. And it could hypothetically include the creation of ADUs, and that's why, at least we at New Hampshire Housing, we're so excited about it. This is a potential tool to help homeowners make that investment in creating additional units. So as far as I know, Derry, Newport, and Keene are the only 3 communities in New Hampshire that have used this program so far. I can't say to the extent in which homeowners have actually taken advantage of it, though, or property owners. I also have not looked at any of their ordinances. I do know that Keene's is brand new, and it was funded with our Housing Opportunity Planning Grant program, so I will look at it at some point. Next slide. This is the one that I think Portsmouth is the most interested in, which is great. It's also probably the one that leaves me with the most question marks. So If there is anybody who can figure it out, it is you all. So housing opportunity zones offer tax relief up to 10 years, and the tax relief starts at the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. A third of the units must be for households earning up to 80% AMI, so there is an affordability requirement in there in order to use this program. It can be improving existing neighborhoods, or it can be used for new construction. Technically, right now, the law does not say the words new construction, and so that was a little bit of a question mark. I think most of us who have interpreted have been like, yeah, that makes sense. There is a bill right now, HB 1103, that would remove the affordability requirement, but allow municipalities to set their own affordability requirements. So you can do something, if a third of the units at 80% AMI doesn't work for you in this market, you can come up with something different. It also will clarify that the housing opportunity zones can be used for new construction, which I think is what we're all thinking anyway. And it establishes that the tax relief is 7 years if there's no workforce housing, and 11 years if there is workforce housing. I guess that operates under the assumption that a community could require no affordable housing. There is one community who has a housing opportunity zone. It is Conway, and it has not been used yet. I think it's still relatively new, and there are some sort of limitations or challenges. The bill, HB 1103, did go through House Housing Committee with an ought to pass recommendation, unanimous, and then it went to the House floor and did well there too, so it's headed to the Senate next. And then the last of the new programs, so next slide, this is the office conversion zones. This is basically an opportunity for you to designate an area for housing redevelopment where owners of office buildings can apply for tax relief to convert that property. So if you have a vacant office space, they can convert that property to housing. This is another one that HB 1103 makes some changes to. It basically broadened and changed the name from office conversion zones to residential conversion zones. It basically is to make it more inclusive, so now it includes retail spaces and industrial uses and other commercial uses too, not just offices. As far as I know, no one has done this yet, so I don't have any good examples for you. But we do have a couple case studies. There are more in here. These are just a few of the ones that I picked out from in here. Next slide, please. And one more. Tried to pick ones that were interesting for you all that might be applicable here, or just really good examples of how this program has been used. Most of these pictures, all the pictures in this presentation, are real New Hampshire pictures of housing that I have taken. Some of them are actually their 79E project examples. So there's about 70 municipalities in New Hampshire that have adopted 79E in some form. There's only one community, like I said, that has done a housing opportunity zone, that's Conway, and only 3 that have adopted a residential revitalization zone, Keene, Newport, and Derry. They have had varying degrees of success. There are communities in New Hampshire that have a 79E program that has never been used, and then there are ones like Manchester that have several projects. So, next slide. I chose to include this one intentionally because I think it's interesting that it's a smaller scale example. If you're familiar with 79E, I think we tend to picture the larger buildings, the larger older buildings, the mill type projects. So I liked the idea of this being a really small example. It's on a half an acre in Lebanon. It's for South Park. It was a single family dwelling that was converted to 5 units, and then they applied for the tax relief 7 years to develop additional units where the back L used to stand before it was demolished. So it was sort of like bringing back a historic portion of an existing home. It's now 8 units, so it went from 1 unit to 8 units. 3 of those units were done with 79E. The owner is currently paying taxes on an assessed value of just under $700,000. Its estimated value when it's taxed at the full value is $1.3 million. So it's a huge increase for tax revenue for the city of Lebanon. This was also an interesting one because it was such a small project that the construction costs in 79E have to be 15%, greater than 15%, or $75,000 of the total starting assessed value. And this one met that threshold. So next slide. This next one is in Dover. Many of you have probably seen it in real life. This is the Stratford County Courthouse. renovation and 4-story addition. 59 apartments, studios, 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms, so a nice mix. 12 of them are rented at no more than 80% fair market rent, because Dover uses fair market rent instead of the workforce housing purchase and rent limits, which is totally fine. Rent is restricted for 21 years, and it's 7 years of relief. So they're paying taxes on the assessed value of just under $800,000. The estimated value is going to be over $7 million. So again, a huge increase in revenue for the community, and the project wouldn't have been possible without that temporary tax relief. The developer is foregoing like $2.5 million in revenue. That's for the 21 years of rent restricted apartments, but Dover's only foregoing like $315,000 in tax revenue. So definitely a win for the community. And then next one. Again, this is one that you're probably familiar with, because this is the factory on Willow in Manchester, built in 1904. I think it was a shoe factory. 90,000 square feet, 4-story mill, so definitely what we think of when we think of 79E projects in New Hampshire, giant mill. It is now, it actually toured it recently, extremely cool, a mixed-use art community, 60 studio apartments, event space, commercial space, outdoor areas. There's a comic book store in there, there's a distillery, there's 16 short-term rentals, which are largely used by like traveling nurses and that kind of workforce. And there's an artist in residence program, so they bring artists here from elsewhere from the globe, free housing and a stipend. And again, 5 years of tax relief, which is not a ton, but it went from being just under $3 million. Estimated value is $8.5 million. So big increase in the sort of productive use of that building. And then I think my last one is in the city of Rochester. This one's relatively recent. 2 historic properties that were owned by the city. That was the Scenic Theater and the Salinger Block. They're right next to each other. This was a Chinburg project. They restored the historic facade. They connected the buildings. They upgraded the interiors. It now has 50 studio 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, 2 commercial spaces. They got 7 years of tax relief. The assessed value was just over $200,000, and again, we're talking like just over $1 million in the estimated value. And it was a big boost for Rochester for their downtown, really revitalized downtown and brought people downtown. And then my last slide is really just about limitations, because there are some limitations to this, and I think it's why it's not used by as many communities or hasn't been adopted or embraced as quickly as it could have been, some of the new programs, that it does of course require some staff capacity and oversight to manage this program. I think it's why it's largely used by larger communities, by cities, and by communities that have professional planning staff who can help to manage it. There's some confusion about aspects of it, like the number of years of relief. Some people think that it's actually only 13 years of relief because the 4 and the 2 for housing and affordable housing aren't cumulative. I think we've all taken the most sort of generous interpretation of the statute and decided it's up to 15 years. Traditional 79E is not specific about what affordable means, unlike housing opportunity zones in its current state. And again, if HB 1103 passes, then you'll have an opportunity to define what that means for you. And then there are challenges. This is kind of the big one, and I know that Dover and Concord and other communities do this really well, that there's challenges with assessing the financial need or the but for. Would this project be possible if not for the 79E? Because you don't necessarily, some people do not necessarily want to use this in a scenario where the development could happen without the tax relief. Want to make sure that the tax relief is doing its job of making something pencil that wouldn't otherwise pencil. Adaptive reuse can be more expensive, of course, with building new, so that's a challenge that might not be as much of a concern here. And then there has been a recommendation that like template documents are needed. Applications, recommended processes, guidance for assessing. I think one of the challenges we were talking about before this with the housing opportunity zones is figuring out what that starting assessed value is before the rehab happens, because there's a concern from some communities, you don't want that delta to be so big that the developer's getting a huge tax relief that they don't necessarily need to make the project happen. So that's all I have for slides, but I can't wait to hear the discussion.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Next up is my colleague Peter Britz, who's got a couple of examples that he did some research on as well. So I'm just trying to
just a good follow-on to what Sarah said. Really, I talked to the city of Keene, and the city of Dover sent us some information as well. And I think city of Dover has some interesting ways they've gone about using this program that I think highlights the fact that there needs to be staff support, but there also needs to be an agreement with the developer on how you're gonna go forward. So in the city of Dover, on their project that they started in June of 2015, the city came up with a development agreement with the developer, and the Dover City Council incorporated a provision later on in 2021 that the projects would have to have attainable housing provisions. And so these are things that are put into that development agreement. Another thing they put into it is that they don't want a project to go forward if there isn't some measurable public infrastructure investment, so widening sidewalks, making, community space, something along those lines. And then that would have to be dedicated for, public use. And then Sarah was touching on it, but the city of Dover also requires a financial analysis of the project, so they can understand the fiscal implications of granting the tax relief, and they require several scenarios. One is, what's the existing condition of the property with no development? What happens when the project is developed? What's the value there? And then what's, in terms of a long-term scenario where the future structure is then removed and replaced with another building. And so they're just trying to get at what are the financial implications of us going forward with this project. And they want to make it worth it for the community. The law requires that a project increase in value by 15%, where Dover requires that a project increase in value by 220% from the original project. So again, things that they negotiate and put in this development agreement with the developer, and things that we can think about to strengthen and make it more worthwhile for the city to go ahead and do. And then they cap the tax relief period at 5 years in Dover, unless there's they call it attainable, that's their below workforce level, or below market rate housing relief period. And then they allow an additional year for every 10%. So if they did 20% units, then they'd get 2 additional years on top of that. And then the whole agreement is recorded in the Registry of Deeds, so they can visit it and understand what happened in the future and make sure they track the project accordingly. So that's more to give background. We don't have, there's so many projects and so many examples we could talk about, but just to give you a little context of how Dover did it. And also, we've been talking here with the assessing department, Peter and I, and what might work in the city. And as Sarah said, the housing opportunity zone seems like our best chance to get some workforce housing, and it might be the incentive that we need to get developers to take advantage of the workforce housing provisions we already have in our ordinance, that they've said, well, it's too expensive for us to do a project with workforce housing. So if they get this tax relief, they might be able to bring a project forward. And so that's something that we've talked about a little bit.
Thank you, Peter. Councilor Moreau, we have entered the question portion.
I was reading my agenda. I knew we were ready. Thank you, Sarah, for coming and joining us. It was actually my request to have this work session because we had talked about, as a council, we had asked staff to sort of look at this, and they really needed more direction. So this point of this entire work session was for us to get enough information to be able to give the staff the direction we want to go in. One of the things that didn't get talked about, and I know it's fairly new, but the Community Coastal Resilience Incentive Zone. That is something I don't think any community has done to date. Is that correct?
Newmarket just recently became the first community to adopt a coastal revitalization zone.
Yeah,
That's probably the extent of what I know about it.
I'm just thinking that would be one of the things, especially where we have the historic neighborhood very close to a lot of floodwaters and talking about flooding even tonight. So I think that is one of the areas we would definitely want to have to do some more research and look at. But I guess, can we write this that when we enact it in whatever areas we do, can we do it so that if we wanted to, I mean, not maybe in the coastal area, but in other areas require workforce housing in order for them to take advantage of it? Or are we not allowed to, do we have to do both, right? Have the ability to or the ability not?
My reading of the housing opportunity zones is that you can require it, and in fact, in current statute, it is required. So you wouldn't be able to use the housing opportunity zone benefit without that workforce or affordable housing component.
Thank you.
And can I just follow up to that? Because you brought up the coastal resilience one. The housing opportunity zone doesn't allow you to build in a floodplain area, but the way that the coastal resilience one would work is it would be similar to the revitalization. So they'd do some floodplain modifications to their home, and that tax they'd get a delay on when they pay taxes on those improvements.
Which I think would be helpful to some of our homeowners.
Assistant Mayor, then Councilor Cook.
Sorry, and thank you, everyone, but really I was excited that we touched on too the residential property revitalization zones, because that's something in the housing committee last session we constantly discussed how we essentially looked at higher density neighborhoods that still felt very livable and still felt very approachable. I think Richards Ave, Lincoln Ave, that area, we really touched on and looked at the fact that some of our zoning today would not allow us to build some of these neighborhoods that we love, including the conversion of larger homes into smaller units. So I'm very thankful that you brought it up, and I know that's something that the housing committee is really going to be focused on this year, is figuring out how can we make some of our larger colonial or Victorian homes into and incentivize the owner. I think that's a huge part that I think a lot of people miss, is that these conversions do cost a lot of money. And ADUs do cost a lot of money. And so figuring out a way to not burden the tax base, the current tax base, but understanding that like we also need housing. And so making sure that we can balance those scales. And I think that Portsmouth is uniquely placed to really look at the residential property revitalization areas and figure that out within our zoning. I think it's really made for these kind of like large scale, big, older homes. So I'm like really excited about that.
Councilor Good.
I have a question around how we can implement this across different zones. For example, if we adopt 79E, can we create not technically an overlay, but kind of an overlay of all the zoning in the city and say, in this area, we want to take advantage of office conversion. We want to make this an office conversion zone. And then in this other area, I work with the Arts and Cultural Commission. They're looking for artist live workspace that is affordable. Can we say this West End Arts District, in this area, we want to have provisions around only having artist live workspace as part of that conversion, you know, and kind of designate based upon different neighborhoods where different parts of 79E would apply.
Right. So my understanding is that yes, for the three newer programs, the office conversion zones, housing opportunity zones, and the residential property revitalization zones, you may have more than one and they can be different from each other. You could even, in theory, if you wanted to have one that was citywide, I don't know if you want to do that, but you could in theory do that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Councilor Bagley.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a curiosity question. In your presentation, you talked about Dover using the below market average. Can you just expound upon that? And is that something Portsmouth could consider?
Yeah, certainly. So whereas other communities will have in their zoning, say, you know, we're tying these to the workforce housing purchase and rent limits that New Hampshire Housing publishes every spring, Dover instead ties it to HUD's fair market rent areas. So when Dover has like an affordability requirement, for example, in the courthouse project, they, you know, require a certain number of the units be affordable per this fair market rent, whereas another community might use workforce housing purchase and rent limits. Dover does that, and Durham now does that. They adopted a new workforce housing overlay district, and they specifically use the fair market rent areas because they talked to Dover about it, and Dover convinced them to do it because they thought it was a good idea. So
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
Oh, just in your opinion, do you think this is something Portsmouth should consider, or is it hard to say?
It's hard to say. I don't know that I have an official stance on which one is better or worse than the other.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask a question, I guess exactly like that, and I wonder based on as we're seeing like our median income, I almost wonder if we'll start seeing a trend that way where our median income, because of whether it's new residents or high income, you know, non really year round residents, and we're seeing that very sharp drive up. I almost wonder if we kind of always use the term here like the permanently below market, but that is essentially what they are saying. They are saying we want to be at a certain percentage below what market rate is.
Yeah, and that's definitely the big advantage of it is that, to your point, if the median income keeps going up, but are we really reaching the people that we want to be reaching because their income's going up, or is it that the median median income for the area is going
And
up?
that's what we're seeing. We're just seeing one of the largest wealth disparities, like in our nation's history right now, where those top 10% earners are earning extremely or lower 80s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, we can open it up to public comment.
So, Gerald Duffy, 428 Pleasant Street. Can you hear me okay? So it's a great presentation I saw earlier. So I'm very excited about its possibilities for Portsmouth. So I just had a couple of questions. I'll start with an example right next door to me on Pleasant Street, which is a type of housing in Portsmouth, and there's probably dozens of like them, perhaps even a couple of hundred. Naturally occurring affordable housing. So we have a building that's the paint's peeling, the shutters are hanging a bit skew with, and there are squirrels in the attic. And there's 6 units, small units there, and I think they're getting 1,600, 1,700 a month in the South End. Now, the owner's elderly, lives in Maine, and I think he's getting ready to sell. So what would be the possible matches between that kind of property and this 79E? Because if things go the way they normally go, it'll be sold, renovated, it'll become 2 very expensive condos or maybe 4 expensive apartments. So that's a question. That's my first question.
Right. I think that's a great question, and certainly you could use the residential property revitalization zones in a scenario like that to support the homeowner in putting some investment into that property. What I don't know is if that would prevent it from becoming not affordable, because I don't think there's any affordability requirement in the residential property revitalization zone, and I don't know if you can put one, but I think that's a really good question to ask.
So there might be the possibility of an affordability factor.
Yeah. Because I'd hate to see it happen and then have it be not naturally occurring affordable housing anymore.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. No, that's exactly my point. So that was one question. Then that kind of answers my second question. So another question I had was, what happens is we get these zoning changes that are designed to improve housing options for us. And they get passed, they go through the process and get passed, and they end up in our 362-page ordinance. And they sit there, and there's no outreach. The city does no outreach at the moment. So are other communities doing outreach? Are they letting people know these things? For instance, the ADU possibilities, are they letting them know they exist?
Yeah, I think you have to do some amount of promotion, right, to make that happen. It was one of the challenges of Conway's Housing Opportunity Zone is that they haven't done that promotion yet to ensure that developers or other interested parties might know about it. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, right. And then let's see, the last thing was, I'm looking at all 4 of these scenarios here, the community revitalization, the residential property revitalization, housing opportunity zone, and then the office conversion zone. Oh, actually the 5th, the coastal resilience. Would Portsmouth, is there any downside to Portsmouth just adopting all of those? I mean, is there any, is there any, other than the legislative work that has to be done, is there any downside with just actually accepting all of them?
Not necessarily. I think the challenge with it would be the administrative, like monitoring enforcement that goes along with it. But since Portsmouth has professional staff, that might be doable. I don't want to speak for the staff.
I think part of it would be just implications on tax rate, how much we're willing to, discuss. It sounded like Dover did some negotiations in terms of the development use agreement that delivered, the uniqueness of Dover, was able to extract what they wanted from a developer, unique to their community. If we apply these kind of all at once without, we have, happen to have probably the most valuable real estate anywhere in New Hampshire. And so, while these are great, it also provides us opportunity to have more leverage in getting what we might want out of this, which would be more deeply discounted rates. And if we do this a bunch of properties vest with something that works in Lebanon that might not work for us, we run the risk of kind of losing that. Obviously, we'd want to base that against, getting, things perfect, being the enemy of the good. So, being able to incorporate this into the housing action plan, being able to have this a part of the master plan, looking at ways that we can implement this quickly, to get enough there. But I guess I would fall back to the example of, we adopted the affordable housing or green space option, and we got a lot of pocket parks within condos that looked very nice for those developments and not necessarily the affordability that we wanted. So it's a great tool. I love, Jerry, that you're here asking these questions, and I love Sarah and the work that staff has done, especially to, that we have Roseanne here, from what money we're leaving on the table that, lowers the burden of taxes of all of us, so that we can all align on what is the possibility of trying to solve this problem as best we can. I would love to say, let's just sign them all, but like New Hampshire's a big place, and these are developed to go in every part of the state. And if we can spend, I think, a little bit of time to say, like, hey, how do we roll these out? It sounds like the coastal resiliency is one. I love your idea, Jerry, of how do we, figure out how do we keep affordable, naturally occurring, just people that, realize you don't have to have a house look great, if the neighborhood is a great neighborhood, to get reasonable rents that support the workforce. How do we keep all of that going? That's a great idea, and I think that if we tie it to what we've already developed out of the housing committee, what we intend to do with the housing action plan, I think we could deliver some things in short order that would be innovative enough while still having a Portsmouth appeal that gets what we want out of them, and doesn't leave too much money on the table or units that are not at the market rate or the below market rate that we look to have.
Right, got it. So just one comment on that. It sounds like they're designed for different purposes, and they would have different uptake. And I don't know how you would estimate the uptake, but there might be very few. For instance, coastal resilience, maybe, I don't know, one project every 2 years or something. So it seems like each one represents opportunities for the city in a different way, and that there is a balance there. If you had them all, it would be like having a quintet. And so I would just ask you to think about that as an omnibus thing. So that was it. Thanks very much for the presentation. It's kind of exciting stuff.
Thank you, Jerry.
Right. If you follow zoning, it's exciting.
So, any other questions? Public comment?
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Avenue. I just had a couple questions. In reading the rules, it looks like it has to be a ballot question. I'm not positive on that. I was trying to figure that out to select the zoning. So I guess my question is, does it have to be a ballot question? My other concern is we had a lot of apartments built in the 80s, and they were given a 30-year where they had to keep rents, 25 to 30 years. Unfortunately, a lot of them came up at the same time. So we had people living in these rent affordable areas that I want to say about 4 years ago, they all came to fruition to be, and then they could go to full market value. So in looking at what Dover has been doing, I think it's kind of humorous we're talking about Dover and using them as an example, because we tend not to like that in our city. I would like to look at how can we really understand the number of years that this can be put in. And I agree with our mayor. We have to look at the financial burden that the rest of us as taxpayers are going to have to deal with. But you know, how much time can we really get into a payment for people in our community to have kind of a steady rent that's not going to jog up when some boom happens here. The place that Mr. Duffy is talking about, I actually lived in at one point. And I would agree, I think there's a lot of those little places that are around here. We have a lot of landlords that are kind to their tenants. The tenants have been there for 25, 30 years, 15 years. And I would really worry that people jump on the bandwagon and then all of a sudden the affordability is gone. And lastly, I really want us to consider that public benefit. If I'm giving up tax, in other words, my taxes are going to go up because that property is going to go off the market for 5 to 15 years, then what am I going to get as a citizen as a benefit? So any legislation that's put in really needs to be considered for that. And I agree with the mayor again. The benefit of public gardens in the middle of, inside a development doesn't help the citizen. So what are we getting as a benefit for the fact that we're allowing the building like Lebanon, which I actually saw, and what are we going to get as a citizen? Because the one way to keep affordability is to keep our taxes down. And unfortunately, some of this stuff, if it's not done right, will take the affordability out of our community even more than what it is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther.
Sue Sterry on Broad Street in Portsmouth. On one of the slides, it says approximately 70 municipalities in New Hampshire have adopted the 79E program. What does adopted mean? Is there a process we have to go through, and what are the guidelines? Because when I've used RSAs for improvements like in cemeteries, they're very specific, but we don't have to adopt them per se. Or is that how this is set up too? Or do we have to go through?
Yep, so this is enabling legislation that exists in the state that we have to adopt as the governing body of this. It does not have to go to a ballot question. We could vote to have that here, as I've just confirmed with the city attorney. We could vote to have it here. Adopted means that it's on the books and available to developers or individuals, like specifically on the ADU issue. That one would seem like I wouldn't call my mother a developer, but she has something that qualifies as an ADU. Whether or not, somebody choosing to do so could get tax relief based on adding ADU, having their house looked at the same valuation, not incorporating the ADU, so they have the benefit of the rent. That's not just offsetting their taxes, which seems, pretty exciting to be able to investigate. But yes, it would have to be adopted by the city council, implemented, go through planning, zoning. We'd have to figure out what that is, and then it would become an ordinance, and then anybody, developers, private landowners, could then use those mechanisms to offer or to build with an incentive that they would get less tax. They would be responsible for less taxes.
So I guess my question now would be, it's an RSA for the whole state. Why can't an individual who knows about it just inquire and try to do it? So that's where the city comes in. They have to go to the city and do it that way.
This is, quote, a local option, so it's not a mandate from the state. It's not, there was some rule changes that happened, recently around ADUs and previously around ADUs, where they changed the zoning. This is the option to change your own zoning, because what we are limited to in Portsmouth is only mechanisms that are allowed to us by the state. So we would have to enable these and then be taken up. So unfortunately, somebody that they could come and try to put it, they would get signatures and they could come, or they could simply just email us and say, hey, this would be a good idea. I'm sure we'll get an email from Jerry on that. Maybe some counterpoints from Esther, but we could get something on here and to discuss, and then likely send it to our planning board for their response before coming back.
So just for clarification in what you just said, which I think I understand, so if a property out on Heritage Drive, which is commercially zoned, I'm assuming that's what's out there, all of a sudden they want to turn it into apartments, do we have to, the zoning, can you just spot zone, or is that part of what you're saying, that we have to change our zoning ordinances to make this apply? And
So that example, the state did just change something in terms of commercial areas, so that's actually, that horse is out of the barn, so commercial can convert into residential. That being said, what what Sarah illuminated here this evening was that previously this was limited to downtown areas. We can now expand this to many different parts of the city. It would be, I think, unlikely that we would choose to do just one property when we are looking at this, and instead create zones like we did with the Gateway neighborhood zone or the Gateway zone and the Gateway neighborhood overlay district. We would probably try to create zones where this was available.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Any other questions we turned it into questions, but we had gone on there, and that's typically not what we do, so appreciate the leeway on that. With that, I just want to thank Sarah for coming in, the work that you've done, and being an advocate across the state on that. We're still proud of you from getting your roots here. And the Seacoast, to Council Moreau, for pushing this, and for everybody that's been interested in, and the work that's going to go in to enable some of these things, and especially the ADUs. It seems like a pretty low-hanging fruit where we can incentivize people to make money in their backyard without then having to put all that money to taxes. Seems like one of the things that we would like to be able to do and incentivize here, but look forward to the broader conversation that I'm sure staff will lead, and appreciate all the work that went into this. All right.
Thank you all so much. I can't wait to see what Portsmouth does so I can put it in the next iteration of this book.
Well, you can't tell Dover about it. That's the issue. All right, we'll be back at 7 o'clock.